The soft clinking of silverware and murmured conversation filled the dimly lit, upscale restaurant, the kind of place where the price of a steak could feed a family for a week. The air smelled of aged wine and seared meat, a luxury Daniel Carter never cared much for. He sat near the window, alone at a small table for two. His daughter had insisted on treating him to something nice for his birthday, but a last-minute emergency at her job left him waiting by himself. Daniel didn't mind. He never needed much. His service jacket, old but well-kept, clung to his broad frame, the patches on the sleeve still visible despite years of wear. His medals weren't pinned on. He never wore them unless necessary. But the faded insignia on his chest said enough. He had served. He had sacrificed. A waitress approached hesitantly, placing a menu on the table. "Would you like to order now, sir?" Daniel glanced at his watch. His daughter wouldn't be able to make it. He gave a small, polite nod. "Just a coffee for now," he said. The waitress nodded and hurried off, just as the front doors swung open. A group of 5 men in expensive suits strolled inside, their laughter sharp and confident, the kind of sound that could turn heads and demand attention. They oozed money, tailored clothes, designer watches, shoes polished to perfection. Their leader, a tall, clean-shaven man with salt and pepper hair, walked with the air of someone who had never been told no in his life. Trevor Langston, CEO, millionaire, entitled prick. Daniel didn't know him, but he knew his type. The kind of man who had never lifted anything heavier than a golf club. The kind who thought wealth meant power. The kind that had never seen war. Langston and his friends took a table near Daniel, their voices carrying over the restaurant like they wanted to be heard. "Would you look at this place?" One of them scoffed. "Barely 5 stars. I should have taken us to the Crescent instead." "Oh, come on," Langston said, smirking. "A little rough around the edges never hurt anyone, except..." His gaze flickered toward Daniel. "Some people just never shake the roughness off." Daniel took a slow sip of coffee, ignoring them. Langston smirked. "Hey buddy, you lose your way to the VFW hall?" The others chuckled, one of them shaking his head. "Didn't realize this place had a discount program for veterans." Daniel didn't react. He had been through worse than this. Langston leaned back, his grin widening. "Hell, I bet he's one of those guys who parks in veteran spots just for sympathy." The laughter grew, but Daniel stayed still. He had fought in 2 wars, seen the worst of humanity. These men were nothing. The waitress returned, her face pale with discomfort, as she set the coffee down in front of him. She gave him a brief look, an apology in her eyes, but she didn't step in. No one ever did. Langston, encouraged by the lack of intervention, pressed on. "You know what's funny? Guys like him act like they're owed something. Oh, look at me. I served my country, now let me cut in line at the grocery store." Daniel's fingers tightened around his coffee cup. "But let's be real," Langston continued. "You're just another guy in a hand-me-down jacket, waiting for the government to send you a check. Right, soldier?" More laughter. Daniel took a slow breath. He wasn't going to give them the satisfaction of a response. But then, a voice cut through the air like a knife. "That man saved my life." The laughter died instantly. Every head in the restaurant turned. A figure stood up from across the room, his chair scraping against the floor. A tall man in a dark suit, broad-shouldered, sharp-eyed. A presence that demanded respect. Trevor Langston's smirk vanished the moment he recognized the face. The voice came again, calm but powerful. "You might want to think real hard about what you say next." The restaurant was dead silent. Daniel finally looked up. The man standing there, Marcus Jennings, billionaire, philanthropist, and, most importantly, a veteran. Langston's face went pale. He had just insulted the wrong man. The silence in the restaurant was thick enough to choke on. The laughter, the smug remarks, all of it had vanished in an instant. Trevor Langston, the wealthy businessman who thought he owned the world, was suddenly looking like a man who wanted to disappear. Because standing across the room, leveling him with an unwavering stare, was Marcus Jennings, a billionaire, a philanthropist, and most importantly, a war hero. A veteran just like Daniel Carter. Langston cleared his throat, forcing a smile. "Marcus, Marcus didn't let him finish. "You talk too much, Langston," he said coolly, taking a step forward. "And for a man with a lot of money, you sure don't know the price of respect." Langston shifted uncomfortably, his confidence evaporating as the other patrons turned their full attention to him. The rich men at his table, who just moments ago had been snickering along with him, were suddenly finding the walls very interesting. Marcus wasn't done. "You think because you've got money, you can look down on men like him?" He gestured toward Daniel, who still sat quietly, hands wrapped around his coffee cup. "You have no idea who this man is. No idea what he's done." Langston forced a chuckle. "Come on, it was just a joke." Marcus tilted his head slightly, like a predator deciding if the prey was worth chasing. "You think what happened to me in Kandahar was a joke?" Langston's smirk vanished completely. Daniel looked up sharply at Marcus. Kandahar. The word hit like a hammer. Daniel had been in Kandahar. Marcus took another step forward, closing the distance between them. "You wouldn't know this, Langston, because you were probably sitting in some executive boardroom when it happened. But I was in a Humvee that got torn to shreds by an IED. My legs were pinned. I was bleeding out. I thought that was it for me." The entire restaurant was silent. The waitstaff, the diners, everyone was listening. Marcus turned to Daniel. And then he came. Daniel stiffened, his fingers tightening around his cup. Marcus nodded at him. "This man, Daniel Carter, was the one who pulled me out. He was the one who ran through gunfire, risked his own life, to get me to safety." He turned back to Langston. "And you? You sit here in your expensive suit, running your mouth like you matter, like your money gives you power. But let me tell you something. Out there," he pointed toward the door, "out there in the real world, men like you wouldn't last a day." Langston looked sick. His face had gone from pale to red, his hands clenching into fists. But he didn't say a word. Because what could he say? Marcus had stripped him down to nothing, exposing him as a coward in front of the entire restaurant. "Now," Marcus continued, his voice dropping to a quiet warning, "you have two choices. You can stand up, apologize, and walk out of here with a little bit of dignity left. Or you can stay, and I'll make sure you never set foot in this place again." Langston's jaw tightened, his ego screaming at him to fight back. But he didn't dare. Slowly, he pushed his chair back and stood up. He turned toward Daniel, avoiding his gaze, and muttered, "I'm sorry." It was weak, forced, but it was all he had left. Then, without another word, he stormed out of the restaurant. His friends hesitated, then quickly followed, leaving their drinks untouched. The moment the doors shut behind them, the restaurant erupted into low murmurs, whispers, nods, glances toward Daniel. The people who had sat silent earlier, who had let the insults happen, were now looking at him with something else entirely. Respect. Daniel, however, just shook his head. "Wasn't necessary," he murmured. Marcus sat down across from him, waving the waitress over. "It was," he said simply. The waitress hurried over, looking flustered. Mr. Carter, sir, your meal is on the house, whatever you want." Daniel looked at her, then at Marcus, then back at his coffee. "Just keep it hot," he said. The waitress grinned, rushing off to get him a fresh cup. Marcus leaned back. "It's about time someone repaid the favor." Daniel chuckled. For the first time all night, he let himself smile. The next day, Langston tried to bury the incident, hoping it would be forgotten. But the restaurant had security cameras. The footage was leaked online. The world watched as a wealthy businessman mocked a veteran, only to be humbled in front of everyone. Langston's company stock plummeted. His board of directors called for a meeting. Within a week, he had resigned. His career, his reputation, gone. And Daniel Carter. He kept going to that same restaurant every morning. His coffee was always on the house, and no one ever again dared to disrespect him.